I'm representing the Muslim perspective today, inshallah, and I'll start with the first revealed word in the Islamic, in Islam and in our holy book, which is the Quran, which was read. This was the first revealed word in Islam, Iqra. Now, this is no coincidence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, this is done on purpose, because in these particular 5 verses that were first revealed, God is addressing the literacy and the education of mankind. And knowledge is mentioned 3 times. In the first 5 verses, read is mentioned twice. It was the first word that was mentioned twice. Knowledge is mentioned 3 times, and the pen is mentioned once. This is in the first 5 verses of revelation that were ever revealed to mankind. So in terms of where Islam comes from, we regard knowledge as one of the greatest things that a person can acquire. For that reason, that you see that it was part of the first revealed words 3 times, and its derivatives in the first 5 verses. Just to note on that matter, when God mentions, He mentions in the first 5 verses that He taught man the use of the pen. Basically, what He's saying that, our scholars, they said it's an innate nature of a person to communicate with one another, speech. So it comes from a person's inborn disposition that for him to have speech. So in terms of the usage of the pen and speech, this is like almost a manifestation of speech, alluding again to knowledge that should be passed from person to person. And God always states in the Quran, He always, he wants to stimulate the mind of an individual. Did they not reflect? Did they not ponder? Do they not think? Always trying to stimulate the mind of an individual. And in Islam, actually, it is an obligation on every single person to pursue knowledge. It's very, very important. In fact, from an Islamic point of view, what we say, and even from a non-Islamic point of view, and I've read so much articles that have been put out even from psychologists and so on and so forth, people who've studied the mind, scientists, the construct of the mind is such that it produces 3 determinations. That which can be, that which can't be, and that which must be. So for example, if a person wants to get married, he says it's possible. It's possible. For some it's impossible, but that was a joke. But for some it's possible. You say it's a possible thing that can occur. And if a person, you see a fingerprint, you'll say, well, it must be that someone would have left that thing. And for that which can't be, if I tell you the smaller portion is bigger than the whole, you say it's impossible. So the mind already has this set up in such a way that God, He's constructed it because He wants you to know a particular thing. And the first obligation that exists, which is, I'm saying all of this as a preamble to what I'm going to say, is that God wants you to know, first and foremost, the first obligation is to know Him. This is the first obligation that exists in Islam. God says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Know that there is no God except God. That there is no God. So through the process of elimination, He wants to actually affirm something. The first obligation, know that there is no God except God. This is the first thing. And the problem really for us in Islam about where we are in the universe is really resolved. You see, because what we say from the Islamic point of view is, if we have commands and we have prohibitions, but we don't understand this universe, we don't understand it, we will say you will never be able to enact those commands and stay away from those prohibitions unless you understand your place in this universe. For us Muslims, that is completely resolved through revelation. The Prophet Muhammad, he would go to the cave of Hira, and he went to the cave and he was there meditating in the cave and pondering, and that's where Archangel Gabriel came to him and he revealed the first word, read. And He revealed the purpose of why we're here and our functions upon this earth. So that problem really is resolved for us in terms of we know why we're here. We know what purpose we have. We know what we have to do. We know what purpose we have to engage in, that which we have to stay away from. So that really for us is a resolved thing. It's very important in that regard. And really for us the pursuit of knowledge is extremely important. And it's extremely important in terms of what we get to know, that when God says know that there is no God but one, what are we supposed to get to know about God? In reality, what we're supposed to get to know about God is His attributes. That, for example, He's an all-willing God, He's a powerful God, He's all-powerful, He's all-knowing, so on and so on and so forth, and His names. So for us, this is an obligation. Also, part of our faith is to know, and this is really the crux of it, really it's all about God. Everything, the whole purpose is about internalizing that aspect about God. He is the one worthy. There is no other worthy, for example, of having attributes like like pride except him. You know, humans aren't worthy of having this attribute. Cut a long story short, again, to limit my speech to 4 to 6 minutes is you know, it's a bit of a difficulty. I want to go everywhere, but I find that how to surmise it is a bit difficult. But what I'll surmise it is this: as a Muslim, we have to accept every single prophet. Every single prophet is part of the knowledge, pursuit of knowledge. And God wants you to think, don't just accept part of knowledge. God wants you to pursue that aspect of knowledge. He said, "La ikraha fi din." There is no compulsion in religion. No compulsion whatsoever. Nobody can strong arm you to accept. Part of what it means to pursue knowledge is to pursue the truth. For us, it's a pursuit of truth, about accepting all prophets, that all prophets are from God. Accepting all and rejecting none. For example, and there are variances obviously between the Christian religion and Judaism, but for us we accept Jesus and we accept Moses, we accept all prophets, we accept Jesus was a prophet of God, one of the greatest messages of God. He healed the dead, the blind, healed the leopard, he caused all these miracles. His mother is considered the best woman, one of the best women in Islam. If you don't accept Jesus or his mother, you're not classified as part of Islam. And the same goes for Moses. And we accept all of these things and we reject none. What we say is that the Prophet Muhammad was the seal of the prophets. He was the one whose fundamental message of belief did not alter from the previous message. It didn't alter. Hence you have, for example, when Jesus says, "I've not come to change the law, but to complete it, to fulfill it." So what we say is in the same context that Muhammad was a fulfillment of that message for all of humanity. He was a universal message. So in reality, the Quran does not stand only for a minor few, or only for the Arabs, or only for a certain portion of the people, but rather for all humanity. So we don't just call it the Quran for a portion of the community. We actually call it as the last testament. The Quran is actually the last testament for all mankind, and Muhammad is a prophet for all people, not only for the Arabs, for all people. That's what we're saying. He is a merciful mankind, and Islam pushes this knowledge and wants to encourage the pursuit of this knowledge in such a way that it is the first obligation. That's why God says, "Fa'lam." Before anything He says, "Fa'lam," and know that there is no God but God.
SUMSA are proceeded?
Is it not that? Can you repeat the last part?
You refer to as the first word of the first revelation.
Of the Quran, yes. I meant of the Quran, yes.
Right.
Of the Holy Book, the Quran. Not referring to the other scriptures that were revealed before.
Okay. So are the other books that were revealed before, are they revelation?
Yes, they were revelation. Yes, the other books, they are revelation, and we believe in all the other books. And we believe they were revealed books, divinely revealed books. What I was referring to is the first revealed word from the Quran, which was read. Sorry for that.
Can I continue on from that point? Yeah, I'm just really interested in what you said about the opening lines of the Quran, and I wanted to maybe play you off Ben, who's disappeared. Would you agree that coming to religious knowledge in Islam is about first coming with faith and then becoming that sort of knowledge? Or would you say that you can sort of get to these truths by knowledge alone? So you think, like, is the rationality that there? Is God rational enough to sort of sit down and just to think and to come up with? Or how instrumental is the revelation in Islamic tradition?
From an Islamic point of view, we say that in order to have belief, it needs to be firm. And that firmness needs, you need to be convinced. And the only way that you will be convinced is to have that knowledge. Now, if a person, from a technical, legal point of view, if a person had an understanding of Islam and he just imitated, so for example, you imitate my faith and you just say, you declare the oath and you embrace Islam, that suffices to enter the faith. But what we say is it's not the strongest form of faith. The strongest form of faith is based on certainty, which is based on knowledge. And it's a really fundamental aspect that's part of Islam, and it's part of what the Prophet Muhammad, when he was saying, if you're going to do something, you should perfect it. And so hence, that knowledge aspect is extremely, extremely important. And this goes back to the origins and the roots. Do we have a time on that? The Arabs, they were illiterate. They were an illiterate nation. Literally they were not cut off from the world, but they didn't have easy access to the outside world. They were illiterate people. So when God addressed them in those 5 verses, He's addressing their illiteracy, and He's addressing addressing their lack of education, and he's basically fervently telling them to seek the knowledge. But in terms of the faith aspect, it has to be should be based on knowledge, on knowing God. Obviously, the knowledge differs from person to person. Like take a scholar, for example, his knowledge of God is going to be different to a person, to a student who's learning. But fundamentally, we do say that the seeking of knowledge is very, very extremely fundamental in Islam. But it's satisfactory for a person to base it on imitation alone, but it's not the strongest form.
I might open that question up to the rest of the panel. So I guess whether in your own religions and faiths, whether it's knowledge that leads to faith and understanding of God, or whether you can get that faith in the
of God and the truths of God and the believing of that oneness and some of the attributes, maybe not on a detailed scale, but definitely from rationale it is possible. There's a famous statement or verse in the Quran that says that a people will not be held accountable unless a messenger or prophet is sent. And so accountability, so let's say that some did not come to know. So then accountability, and no messenger was sent to them, and there was no possible way, so then there's no accountability. But what we definitely say in the schools of thought in our region, absolutely is possible through your rationale, that even if no prophet was sent, the mind will absolutely, because of the construct of the mind I was speaking about before, that the mind will absolutely deduce from a rational point of view that God does exist. So I just wanted to make that point. Sorry. In trouble there, man.
I guess the question kind of is, I think you're asking whether some of the things that might be seen as laws are more culturally known, and whether we can choose from those. For example, women testifying in court.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are certain issues within some faith that extend onto the civil discourse and others that don't. So, for instance, a lot of religious groups take issue with gay rights and gay marriage from a religious point of view, despite that being a civil issue today, whereas they won't take issue with capital punishment being that's okay. So, just the delineations of what is, oh, well, this is our sphere and that's their sphere, and what is, we have to get involved in that because that's a violation of what we believe. Sure. What we would do, navigate that.
I still don't see how I answered it.
That's fine.
Can I say, women testifying in court, you mentioned something, and I think you mentioned 2 witnesses for women, so that was specifically for me. Anyway, that's all right. I like this again, clarification. First of all, in Islam, particularly Hanafis, women can be judges in Islam. Did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah, you know
I
that. A woman can be a judge. And the women testifying leading 2 women as opposed to a man, I just want to discuss something straight off the bat. This has absolutely nothing to do with gender. This has nothing to do with the context that the woman, for example, she's disqualified or she's there's something wrong with her, or she's less in status. This has nothing to do with that. There are other more issues which we probably don't have the time to discuss in terms of why 2 witnesses are needed as opposed to a man. But the greatest scholar in history in Islam after the prophets, you know who it was? You think it was a man or a woman?
Given the true nature of the question.
It was a woman. It was a woman. Did you know that?
I did not.
There are 2 things you learned today. So, and her name was Aisha. They said her father was greater, but he was her father anyway. So even if her father was greater, that would be okay. But she's still the greatest, one of the greatest female scholars in Islam that ever existed. We have our scholars, you know what they said in Islam? One of them was Ibn Hajar. He said, Islam saw 2 great inclines, 2 massive great inclines. And you know what? Those inclines, you know what he put it down to? He said because there was an influx of females who were scholarly. You know what we have, we say, you educate a woman, you educate a nation. So in that regard, did you know we said that? Sorry, I'm just trying to get.
Is that from the Quran or is that from the Hadith?
This is from the scholars. This is from the scholars. You educate a woman, you educate a nation.
Education, in fact, with the Prophet Muhammad, in terms of how he educated, especially his wife Aisha, there wasn't a thing except that he taught us. There's a lot of things. Some of the women would come up and say, "Oh, Prophet of God, you need to dedicate time for us." And he did. He dedicated time for the women when he taught them. It was phenomenal. If we have a discussion just on women in Islam, it would be phenomenal. The first university in the world, you look this up, I won't give you the name. The first university in the world, you know who was white? 2 female women who were Muslim. 2. We love, again, we push for education. Look, but I want to address the latter part of the question. In terms of the times and the times changing, we definitely say, and this is, we say that a person must conform regardless of the changing times. A person must conform to the adherence and tenets of the religion. You can't change a religion to suit the time until you're white. If that was the case, if you said that a person, the religion has to conform with the time, it becomes very problematic, because then you're insinuating that religion is through intellect, and it was deduced through the rationale, and it wasn't through revelation. And this becomes a problem, not only for Christianity, not only for Islam, but for Judaism as well. It's not something that was rationally deduced by the mind, but there's revelation at the source, yes? So what we say is, you can't say as a society, even as society changes, that you have to, the religion has to conform with the changing times. Rather, the people have to conform with the religion. You know, I just want to quote you something very quickly. Orb Laidlaw, and I don't know if you know who he was, and maybe a lot of people aren't aware of him. Orb Laidlaw was a Bondi beach inspector. And you know, funnily enough, what happened, there was a council act. There was a council act that women were forbidden to walk around in 2-piece suits because it was viewed upon as rude and so on. So what he did, he confined one of the women who was wearing that, and subhanAllah, she was a brunette from Lincoln, she was from my area. But this was back in the 1960s, 1970s. Well, his name was Orb Laidlaw. So he confined her to the sheds until transit police came and they issued her with a fine. So what we say is, you know, the times are always going to change. You know, look how that time perceived it, look how this time perceived it. But again, that's just through the changing times. So if you're going to say time, you know, the society is always going to need something different. But in reality, when are you going to have the objective thing rather than the subjective thing? And that's where religion comes in. It's objective. It's objective. It's actually through revelation. Because at the end of the day, time keeps changing. Rather, you know, what's dictated is just a personal pursuit of an individual. It becomes very, very problematic. Those morals exist because they're objective. Those morals exist because they're objective. Once they become subjective, it becomes very problematic for humanity as a whole. It's very important that I address it in that way.
Thank you.
I like that.
Yeah, this is quite complex. Like, I think this is a quite complex question. It'll be hard to go through it just now. But it seems like it has certain questions.
The darkness and the light, and really coming out of our ignorance and into a realized state. And probably for a Hindu, I would say that it's around our separation, the identity that separates us between everything around us. And the ultimate knowledge would be actually to realize the oneness of all that is. And I think it comes to aham brahmasmi, meaning I am that, I am all that is. In my opinion, that is the internal self-realization, that is the knowledge that we exist in oneness, the divine, all of us, all of humanity, all of creation. So that's what I would say is the key point of the knowledge. And just to feel, I can't argue with you, I'm sure, but you were talking about, no, I'm certainly not qualified, but you know, it's interesting because you were talking about the faith as being very objective, but I'm thinking in the Hindu faith, because it's so pluralistic and we have so many different lineages and pathways, that it does become quite subjective, and it does become to the person's own self-experience and how they relate to the divine and what their process is that is valid and valuable. And I think that's what makes Hinduism so tolerant and so open to other faiths and other perspectives, that we we can speak from our personal experience, and we're not just locked into one way of being. There's many paths.
Definition of always the okay. So the trying to sum up. In Jewish mysticism, there is a idea that again we're talking about mysticism, not necessarily something that's everyone can understand on a simple level. But Jewish mysticism explains that we're not actually here. In physicality, in physical presence, we do not exist. In essence, what we all are is God, godliness. And if we were, so to speak, from an objective point of view, look down upon us, remove yourself from your body and look down from God's point of view, we will not be here. Because we're all God. We're all one essence of God. However, we live in a physical world, therefore that doesn't make any sense. So we have to actually approach this idea from a practical, physical, intellectual point of view. And the intellectual point of view that reconciles this is that the ultimate concept of knowledge is that whatever brings you closer to revealing godliness in this world and show and understanding how you are part of that concept of godliness, that's knowledge. Whatever opens your eyes and makes you understand how God is here, God is within me, I am part of God, this is part of God, this is part of God, that with just a projection of godliness within a physical realm, anything that opens your eyes to that's knowledge.
Sorry, I just want to clarify on this. We can speak also about personal connection. This is just a clarification. We can speak about personal relationship with God. What I meant was the source is objective. Like morality, for example, there are no moral principles that are objective. Otherwise, if there's no God, all right, people say there's no God, then morality becomes subjective. Therefore, murder is in the past. Well, who's to say that what they're articulating is not moral? And we know that's not the case. So this is what we're saying is the source is objective because it comes from Him. And that's what we're saying. But that's different to sort of the relationship. That's sort of what I meant. I can speak from a very personal. We all have a personal connection with God. And my personal connection is going to be different to your personal connection to His and to every one of us here. So that's what I meant by going. Not that there can be no personal connection. Definitely there is based on experience. Also, what you said, I think you were quoting the verse from the Quran, I'm not sure. God is the protector, the guardian of those who believe, who took them from the darkness into the light. So we believe in terms of knowledge, it is a total removal of darkness and a manifestation of light. It's a situation that was unclear that became clear. And also what we say in terms of knowledge, when a person, so your brain is made in such a way that when you acquire knowledge, the soul is enlightened. It's like sometimes when you learn a thing about God, you feel this overwhelming thing. And so what we say is knowledge as well, it's an enlightenment of the soul. So when you learn it, the brain produces it and goes through that process, your soul is enlightened. But fundamentally, it is, as stated, it is that taking from the darkness into the light, which is a fundamental concept.
I would say that maybe knowledge can be seen as an understanding of concepts that have to do with our existence. So from a religious perspective, that would be concepts related to the existence of God, the existence of our presence on this earth.
But we believe that knowledge, the essence of God, is unknowable. You can't know His essence, but what you can know is His attributes. So therefore, we believe that on the day of judgment, we will see God.
but you won't know what it is. Just like you look at the sun, you won't know what it's comprised of, but it's actually actual sight. But you know what? You don't know what the composition of the sun is.
So the light question, you won't know his essence, but you'll know the attributes and names. And in terms of knowledge, in terms of from a human perspective, your knowledge differs to God's knowledge. So you only know things that are knowable and which He's allowed you to know. But your knowledge differs from His knowledge in that His knowledge is not acquired after ignorance, whereas your knowledge is acquired after ignorance. So you didn't know, then you know, and your knowledge will be prone to loss in the future. Whereas with God, His knowledge was not acquired after ignorance and will never be subject to loss, or prone to loss in the future. If that makes sense.
Sure. Unfortunately, creation and the male force is the matter side of things. So Hindu women are revered as that divine embodiment of the sacred feminine, but in practical reality there's a whole lot of other on-the-ground issues around that that are not always treated that way, unfortunately.
In Judaism, we don't believe in the modern day concept of equality. Let me explain. That, you have a carpenter. Carpenters are excellent at making wooden vessels. Wood tables, beautiful cabinets. You have a stonemason, beautiful, making beautiful statues and buildings. You're not going to ask a stonemason to go make a cabinet, and you're not going to ask a cabinet maker to go make a building. Every single person in this world has a unique role and a unique talent that they are being put here that only they can achieve. Person A cannot achieve person B's role, person B cannot achieve person A's role. That's what I mean by there isn't something as equality, because we're not equal. We are all different. We may be equal in the fact that we all have equal rights, but we are all different by the fact that each one of us has a different role. And therefore, a woman's role in society, from a Jewish perspective, is no different from that of a man's role. They need to fulfill their role in their life, and a man has to fulfill his role in his life. And through the ages, the roles may have changed, and there may be different perceptions. Again, this goes back to the question of society. Society tells us what men and women should be doing. So, in modern day society, women now have this role that they may have had a different role 200 years ago. 250 years ago, 300 years ago, not necessarily was society, not necessarily did society recognize the role of women to enter university or to enter into higher academic works. That does not mean that society was wrong. That means that society deemed it not necessary. This society, fast forward how many years, this society now deems women should be pursuing academia. So be it, women now pursue academia, and that is correct. There's no contradiction to say that how many years ago it wasn't like that, and now it is to say that they were wrong. Their society felt that was right. So they act, it's always easy to say negative about someone on that. That society was wrong, right? 200 years ago they were dead now. But nowadays we don't have we have a different society. That society tells us that women should pursue academia, women should take up roles of whatever it is that society tells us. Okay, well, what is their role now?
Women have a very distinguished place in Islam. Very distinguished place, very high place. The Prophet, one man came to the Prophet Muhammad and he asked about the mother, what role she occupies in Islam, or who comes first, the mother or the father. The Prophet Muhammad said, your mother. He said, then he said, your mother. He said, then he said, your mother. He said, then he said, then your father. So she takes gold, silver, and bronze. He just gets consolation. So, look, the Prophet Muhammad, he said, can you imagine, he's addressing all the companions, thousands of them. He said, the best amongst you. Imagine this statement, the best amongst all of you, the best. The Prophet Muhammad has addressed the body, he said, the best amongst all of you. They're all very attentive. They said, who is that? He said, the one who is good to his wife. He's the best amongst all of you. Do you imagine this? Do you imagine in what status he's putting the woman? In such a very high status. In the status that's saying that the making of you, who you are, depends on your treatment of her. That's who you are. That is the defining of a man. And when there's a good relationship at home, and when a man is good to his wife, he functions. He thrives at everything he does. But trust me from experience, I deal with a lot of people. If he's having a fight with his wife, he fails at everything he does. He goes to work stressed, he comes back stressed. There's a lot of issues when a person doesn't have that relationship that he should have. The Prophet Muhammad, in terms of his example, in terms of women, he showed us the example, and the reason why I'm quoting is because of him telling us how we should behave with our wives, our sisters, and our daughters. That his wife would drink from a cup, he would pursue that cup and find where her lips were, her lip marks on that cup, and put his lips on the same area that her lip marks were on. He would imitate this. He would, every day when he left the house and kiss his wives, he would brush and stroke his wife's face in a very gentle way. There's even a narration, a hadith, which I'm sure you've heard of, that whoever righteously raises a daughter, that he will be granted paradise because of her upbringing, whoever looked after her, cared for her. This was not, he didn't state that for a boy, but he stated that for the woman. He also, and some, you know how everybody has spoken about truth here today, and truth, that fundamental truth? You know, how important do you think it would be for a prophet, that truth? That fundamental aspect of who you are, that truth. That's, in Islam, they call that urwat al-wuthqa. In Islam, it's called urwat al-wuthqa. You know what the Prophet Muhammad, he would say to his wives? He would say, you are to me like urwat al-wuthqa. You are to me like the truth. How dear to me is the truth? It's my being. You are as dear to me like that. It really, in today's sense, he had running races with his wife. Running races. On the first time, she beat him. On the second time, he beat her. She got upset. At one stage, he put her on his shoulders, and there was some people that had come from African children that were outside, and she wanted to watch, and he actually put her on his shoulders, and she was watching them until her heart sufficed. And there was one occasion where his wife was speaking in this particular narration, and the narration was so long. And if you read this narration, you'll laugh because all he was doing was listening. He was teaching us how to be an active listener. Don't pretend you're listening, but be an active listener. And at the end, she was talking about all these husbands, and he said that at the end, he said, I am to you like Abu Dhar is to his wife, with the exception that I will never leave you. Because one of the other individuals left his wife. So you see at the end of the day, you know, religion, some people use religion to try and get away with, you know, actions of degrading a woman or putting a woman in a state as though she's inferior, whatever the case may be. This is absolutely not the case. Women were involved in battles. They were there in battle. They were there. They were working. His wife Khadija, that he married for the first 25 years of his life before she passed away, she was involved in business, and she was a successful businesswoman. And he actually took part of the money that she had, and he invested that for her. And anyway, so you see that women enjoy the highest status in Islam, and it is our job, in fact, it is a woman's job, a man's job. It is a fundamental part of your character to look after, whether it be his wife, his sisters, so on and so forth. Not because at the end of the day they don't have rights, they enjoy the same rights as a man. As the rabbi said, they enjoy different roles. They have different roles, but they equal the same rights. But you know, their honor and their status and who they are in Islam is so superior that it's phenomenal. You know what? This 5 minutes doesn't do it justice. There are so many examples. There's so many examples I can give you. But just the fact that he said that the best of you, you know, he made the measure of the man. He made the measure of the man according to the treatment of his wife. You imagine that? Let that stick in your mind.
Thank you. And Safa? I'm really glad you asked this because it's really important. Something that the Baha'i teachings teach is that in what makes human beings human and the essence of our being, which we see as the soul, which is given different terms by different people, is actually without gender. So what I mean by that is that